the cloud. Good. So let's start with Cindy Cohn. Cindy, welcome to the Lasers. I wanted to have you as a speaker for a long time. Cindy Cohn, in fact, you were scheduled for a previous laser. I think it was my fault we had to postpone. Cindy Cohn is a civil liberties attorney and executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an organization that since 1990, I just heard, has been championing user privacy and free expression on the internet. Among many other things, in 2018, Forbes included Cohn as one of America's top 50 women in tech. Again, detailed bio at lasertalks.com. So the audio for the Zoom is yours. I will kill my video just to give you maximum bandwidth. So I ask Elvi and Elizabeth to do the same, just in case. And now it's all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. And you're right, we tried pretty hard to get this thing scheduled. I'm so glad we're finally able to do it. I'm delighted to talk to you today. You know, I'm looking at the list of people who come and speak at these events, and I feel like I'm a bird of a slightly different color because I am a lawyer by training. I am the executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and you know, my job is generally to be an advocate and to fight for your rights online. When you go online, I'm not a deep scientist or someone who's developed new technologies, but I do spend a lot of time trying to make sure that your technologies work for you. So when Piero talked to me about this, I thought it would be fun to, you know, I spend a lot of time, you know, here's this horrible problem. Apple wants to scan everybody's phone. We need to fight that. Here's this thing. We need to fight that. We need to stop the NSA from tapping into the internet. We need to try to, you know, fight back against the surveillance business model. I wanted to flip the script a little bit and talk with you a little bit about, you know, what does it look like if we get it right? How can we imagine a future where we have real digital privacy? And what would that future look like? And what are some of the component parts that we would need to put into place to get us to that thing? I think one of the most important pieces of making a better future is the ability to imagine it. And sometimes especially with today's kind of dialogues online, it feels like we've lost that ability to imagine. So if you'll humor me, I'm going to try to do that. And as you can tell from my career and my life, this is not actually my natural way, but I feel like it's important. And I'm very curious to see people's questions and answers and ideas in the chat. EFF is actually, we launched a podcast last year called How to Fix the Internet that was kind of a little 6-series try at it. And we're lucky enough that we're going to get to do another series of them. And so I'm interested in how you think we can fix the internet, but also more importantly, what does it look like in our lives if we get this thing right and we have digital technologies that are the ones that I think we really deserve. So I want to talk about a couple of things. The first thing I want to say, because I think it permeates the privacy conversation, is I think there is this idea that there's privacy vis-a-vis the government and privacy vis-a-vis private companies or other people. Now, I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but I think one of the places we have to start from in the current reality is there isn't a very big difference. And the reason for that is that one of the very top consumers of the information that's collected about you by a lot of the companies you do business with, whether that's AT&T that provides your phone service, or a Google or a Facebook, or better yet, or more likely the downstream surveillance business model, the adware, techware, people who are building profiles of you. Law enforcement, both domestic and national security in slightly different ways, are huge consumers of the information that's collected by us about private companies. And so to talk about, well, are you more worried about the government, or are you more worried about corporations, or do we need to focus our efforts at plugging the privacy holes vis-a-vis the government, or plugging the privacy holes vis-a-vis the companies? I will tell you, I think that's kind of a silly endeavor, because at this point, while there are some process changes, there isn't that big a distinction because law enforcement gets a lot of information from the companies that collect it. So I just wanted to start with that because I think we have to take both on, and if we don't take both on, we're missing something. So what does this world look like? Well, I think there are a couple of things. There are a couple of things that this looks like. I think that this looks like data. This looks like your devices and your tools and your services. They respond to you. They don't respond to other people. There's not what the lawyers call secondary uses of data collected. I mean, that's Facebook's whole business model, right? You're posting pictures and you're talking to your friends, and Facebook is making secondary uses of that data to try to decide what ads you see and what news you see and what comes up in your feed. You don't give Facebook the data because you're really interested in the ads. You give Facebook the data because you're really interested in seeing the pictures of your, your cousin's new baby or your grandkids. Or other things, or getting access to information from your school group, or things like that, which is increasingly those places where we gather are on private platforms. So I think one of the things we want to think about is if we live in a future where we really have digital privacy, we live in a future where the technologies that we use are not making secondary uses of our data without consent and clear understanding by us. What I call this two-faced technology, right? Technology that pretends to be about letting you do one thing, but is actually about doing another thing. I think we need to articulate the concerns with that, and we need to really shift the paradigm there. One of the paradigms I really like in this is being developed by some law professors. Woody Herzog and Neil Richards have done some of the best work on this. And this is an idea called a data fiduciary. This is when you give your data to a third party for a service that you want. You give your location to Google because you want to know how to get from here to there using their mapping systems. Google has a duty to you, a fiduciary duty. That's a lawyer term for they have to act in your interest in all of their uses of that data. If any of you are accountants or lawyers, even medical professionals, you know about fiduciary duties. That means that you have to put your client's interest first. And not your own interests. This is one way to kind of articulate the shift. Now, that might be something that you do individually as putting this obligation that with your data on someone else. This might be something where you have an agent who helps you do it. Some other folks out of Stanford have floated this idea of data trusts, where there's a whole bunch of your people's data that's gathered together in a trusted entity, and that entity negotiates how that data can be used on your behalf, thus creating a collective, a more powerful collective right, just like having a bunch of people gather together to get and negotiate for insurance rates, get much better rates than each of us individually alone. There's a lot of ways that this could happen, but I think it's a concept that we need to start thinking about if we're going to have a future with real data privacy, which is making sure that the third parties that we entrust our data to, because we want all the good stuff, right? We want to be able to use the Google the maps and get from here to there. We want to be able to talk to our loved ones. We want to be able to do all the wonderful things that technology can let us do. But we just don't want those things to come at the expense of our privacy. What else do we have in this? Well, I think the other thing that we need to think about is actually technical privacy and security. So I think in our future, we need to have a lot of encryption. We need to have the data that is stored with third parties, that's transited from our device to various servers or where else we go. It needs to be protected along the way. That means it needs to be end-to-end encrypted wherever possible. Now, we've made great strides in this in one realm in terms of the web traffic. And, as of about 10 years ago, if you surfed around the web, you're probably using something called http://www.stanford.edu. Today, when you're surfing around the internet, you're probably doing it through https://www.stanford.edu. And that little S means secure. And this is a a protocol that has existed for a long time in the World Wide Web, but in the last 10 years, EFF, along with a lot of other groups, have made this the default way that you go around the internet. And the reason that that helps you give you real digital privacy, it means that whatever you're doing when you're using the World Wide Web is protected in transit. And can't be tapped into by bad guys or by, you know, well-meaning NSA spies. Either way, you're protected as your communications travel around the internet. This is one of the great privacy, I think, successes of the last 10 years. And it's a little geeky and it's not really known by people, but it makes people a whole lot more secure. EFF is part of a group called Let's Encrypt. That has started to doing this for web certificates. And we also built a little plugin called HTTPS Everywhere that could plug into Firefox and Chrome and give you HTTPS wherever you went. And we're about to retire our little plugin because all of the major browser companies have built HTTPS into what they're doing. So that's some good news. We really are moving towards a future with more digital privacy. What are the other things that we need to do to kind of, what else would we have in this world where we had real digital privacy? I think the other thing we would have is we would have baseline privacy protections in law. The law, you know, there are several. California has a Consumer Privacy Act. If you're in Europe, the GDPR in Europe are trying to set some baselines for privacy. I think we're not all the way there yet. I think we need a solid baseline privacy protection that companies and the government cannot go below in terms of digging into your personal lives without proper foundation. I think we're seeing that the world in which your privacy is dependent on contracts, right? Click wraps and end user license agreements is not giving people real privacy. Indeed, many of these things and privacy policies that we see all around the internet, which are really contractual promises or promises, sometimes not even to the level of a contract, they're not keeping us, you know, they're not really giving us much privacy. And so we need to go beyond that and we need to set some baseline rules in law. I don't say that lightly. As somebody who comes from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, you know, we love innovation. We love innovators. We like people to be able to come in and think completely differently about how things should be and build them. But unless we're building on a solid foundation of privacy, I think that of consumer privacy, we see far too many tools and technologies and services that are really not fair to users. So we need to set a baseline rule now. EFF has a proposal that we call Privacy for All. That was a proposal for California. The California Consumer Privacy Act is still getting its feet under it. It may turn out to be a pretty good privacy protection. The GDPR certainly raised the bar, but I think we have further to go. And I think we need solid international baseline privacy protection all around the world. And then we need to, you know, make sure that our tools are really answerable to us and not to anyone else. We have a recent example of that right now going on with Apple. Apple had introduced two efforts, or for two purposes, to be able to scan the information that's on your device, on your phone or iPad without your permission. For purposes of, you know, of a couple different purposes, depending on why they're doing it. But we think that's really not building a future with real digital privacy. If Apple can scan your device without your consent and knowledge and report you either to your parents or to the government or to somebody else, then you don't really have privacy. And, you know, why do we care about that? Well, we care about that because privacy, first of all, is a human right. But more importantly, it protects us against governments around the world in the context of government reporting that might want Apple to do that kind of scanning for purposes other than laudable purposes. And in the context of scanning your phone to report to your parents, we know, sadly, that, you know, not all parents are perfect, and that one of the things that can be very dangerous for kids is to not have at least some measure of privacy against their parents. So I think that these are your devices, the things that you buy with your hard-earned money. They should be yours. They should answer to you alone. And any attempt to try to get into them to see what you're up to ought to be something that we prohibit. And I think that's the only way that we can get to real privacy. And that's not even getting into the concerns that this could be misused. So what do we have in our beautiful rosy future? We have our own devices. They only answer to us. We know that they only answer to us. We have transparency in how they're working so that we can see they're only working to us and they don't have secondary uses or two-faced technology. And we have real accountability when the people who have access to our data misuse it. And we need accountability on both sides. We need accountability when the government misuses your data, and we need accountability when the companies misuse your data. Right now, we have very little of either. On the sides of the government, we have a lot of protective rules around government misuse of data, whether that's things called sovereign immunity or the state secrets privilege in the context of the activities of the national security infrastructure, or the protections like qualified immunity that law enforcement has for taking your data and misusing it. These are all things that we really need to interrogate and shift dramatically if we want to have real privacy again. On the corporate side, we need two or three things. The first thing is we need to be able to sue them if they misuse our data, and have those suits stick, and have those suits hurt, and have us be able to get accountability. I'm a lawyer. I'm going to go for a legal remedy as well. But we shouldn't stop there. We need people to have better choices. I mean, at this point in time, we have 5 major companies that are really dominant in the digital space: Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. And 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, how you counted those, have surveilling you as a business model. Apple generally would be the only one that doesn't. Microsoft's a little less, but certainly Google, Facebook, Google and Facebook certainly have a tremendous interest in surveilling you as part of their business model. We need to be able to choose better tools. And we need more competition so that people can take their stuff and leave if service isn't serving them well in terms of their privacy. What we had an interesting test example just recently. Apple gave us the ability to say whether we wanted apps to be able to track us or not. And 80% of Apple users chose no. I don't want to be tracked by apps. I think that's a powerful signal in the market, and one that ought to be something that regulators and others and all of us take notice of. Like, none of us like being tracked around the internet, and this story that we all love it because we get more relevant ads is one that just doesn't hold water when you actually ask people what they want. And then the third thing we need our agency watchdogs, our FTC, in the context of broadband and our broadband service providers, the FCC, and our state agencies, to really have the ability and the power to stand up and protect our privacy. Sometimes, privacy problems are tiny little cuts that affect a whole lot of people, and it can be very hard to bring those kinds of things in the context of civil litigation. But it is something that agencies can do. So there's a role for all 3 of these things. The market, I want to leave if I don't like it. The lawsuit, I want to hold you individually accountable if you violate my privacy. And agency enforcement, where an agency can really take a look across things and make the kinds of bring a kind of accountability that's very difficult to do in either of the other 2 situations. So we need all 3 of those to separate, to help build our digital privacy future. So those are, let me see, how am I doing on time? Ooh, I'm pretty close. So that's my vision of our privacy protected future. We have lots of things that we need to do to get to there. And we have new threats as well. We have things like facial recognition, which is being built into many, many tools and being used in ways that are particularly troubling, especially around really the wide diversity of humans, right? Trying to crunch that down into something that a machine learning algorithm can match. We end up with people of color not really getting the benefits of facial recognition, in fact, being discriminated against because of it. The harms are very real when we see this stuff being implemented in things like proctoring software. I mean, I know this is a Stanford event. I have very strong feelings about the kinds of anti-cheating software that's being sold to large institutions, most of which is really not able to deal with the wide diversity of students and students' environments. And so therefore, our privacy is being violated in order as a function of us being able to get educated. But yet these systems are not transparent to us. We don't get to agree with them, and we have very limited ability to challenge them. So facial recognition, gait recognition, some of this stuff that is really crazy, almost like phrenology, trying to predict people's emotions and things like that from these things, are all things that need to go into our bucket of how do we create a privacy protected future, because we shouldn't be judged by machine learning systems and AI, although I use that term advisedly, that really don't take into the full account of things. I just met with some disabled people today, and the ways in which these systems are unfair to them are tremendous, and take a hard situation and make it harder. So that's my pitch about a privacy protected future. I would love to answer your questions or hear your thoughts about what it would look like if we got it right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. So one question I have, I know you're not an engineer, but you work with engineers. It's fine that we are thinking of more legal constraints, okay, that will limit what corporations and governments can do. But I feel it's an endless game. I mean, every year, a corporation, a government, or a company like Cambridge Analytica comes up with a new way to do things that we don't like. Are people thinking about just tweaking the internet, just doing something on the internet? See, the internet was not designed to protect our privacy. Tweaking the internet in a way that this will not be possible anymore. I guess I'm influenced these days. I'm looking into blockchain technology, and there's one thing I like about blockchain technology. It forces you to be honest. You can't be dishonest. A smart contract is automatically executed. So is there a way that we can tweak the internet and we make it automatic, that companies and governments and anybody must be limited in the way they can access my data?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly there are things we can do. I talked about implementing strong encryption from, cradle to grave on things. Technology can serve a tremendously important role. Privacy by design is a whole area of thought in engineering about how do you design systems so that you build privacy in from the beginning rather than try to bolt it on later. And so I'm all in favor of that. I would say after 30 years in this space, I think we need to bring, Larry Lessig talks about the 4 elements, law, code, norms, and oh my gosh, I forgot the 4th. That are all things that must be brought to bear. And I think if we think that the internet exists such that there are a couple of tweaks that would automatically protect our privacy, I don't see them. I don't see them. I think encryption is our best tool. And again, you're right that in some ways the internet wasn't built to protect our privacies, but in some ways it was, right? HTTPS was always there in the spec. Lots of the basic building blocks of the internet have more secure forms. We just didn't choose to use them. And so I think that we can do that. There's a lot of technical things we could do. I would be happy if we could solve this with tech, and me as a lawyer, I could sit back and just say, nerd harder. But I think we're going to have to bring other elements of our society to bear if we're really going to protect people's privacy and bring about this world.
And then I have a question as a devil's advocate. So this came out just chatting with a neighbor. She was complaining that her kids, I don't remember which kid, was being bullied on I don't know if it was Facebook or whatever, and she was saying, and she was bullied by somebody who is anonymous. I mean, it was just some some name, but it wasn't somebody she would recognize. And so she was actually angry at the fact that we cannot know the name of that person. So, so as a devil's advocate, one could argue too much privacy actually encourages people to behave in ways that are not ethical.
I think that first of all, I'm very surprised that that happened on Facebook, because Facebook has a real names policy, and you have to identify yourself on Facebook. So it is not, it's not possible.
Yeah, I don't remember which website,
but I think that makes my point, which is, if you think that making people be identified all the time will bring about a perfect world where people behave better, I would like to introduce you to Facebook. People have to be identified on Facebook. They have to positively identify. We work with lots of trans people and other people who have legitimate names, domestic violence victims, and other people who have very legitimate reasons why they may not want to use their real names. And they get kicked off of Facebook all the time because they are not using their real names. And Facebook is a cesspool of people being horrible to each other. So I just think that's exhibit A. But honestly, researchers have looked at this, and there was some good work done by a professor named Chris Hufnagel at the University of Cal Berkeley. And there have been others as well that really don't show any correlation between having to be positively identified and good behavior. So I just think that the data doesn't support this, and we know the downsides, right? We know that the dissidents in China who are trying to get information out, or the people in Myanmar, we work with people EFF is a global organization. We work with people all over the world for whom attaching their name to what they say can mean death. And one of the great benefits that the internet brought about is that people can get their stories out without their names being identified with them. It's a much safer way for a lot of people around the world in dangerous situations. And this is true, as I said, in global human rights situations and dissident situations. And it's true very close to home in situations involving domestic violence, violence in the home, violence in the family. In all of these incidents, whether they're giant or small, making sure that people can seek help, can seek information, saves lives. And the counter story that forcing people to identify themselves makes them behave better and gives them a freedom from accountability does not have data behind it. So when I look at this situation, it's a no-brainer. That's not even getting into the fact that the US Constitution, since the founding of this country, has protected people's rights to anonymous speech. Why? The Federalist Papers were written under a pseudonym, right? Publius, right? Because it was pretty dangerous to be talking about founding a new country in colonial America. And even after the founding of the country, there were duels. There was a lot of blowback. A lot of people who were engaged in what who now we exalt as the founders of the United States took advantage of, and rightfully so, the right to communicate anonymously. I think we throw that out at our peril.
Mm-hmm. How much support you get from corporations themselves about this? After all, for a corporation, if they could claim, hey, we totally, EFF gives us a certificate of good behavior. It should be a plus, right?
Well, I will tell you that a lot of people would like our certificate of good behavior, but we're not in the business of that. I would have to have a flotilla of people to dig down into people's technologies to make sure they're really doing what they say they're doing. So we don't do that. There are, look, I think that, we pay a lot of attention to the Facebooks and the Googles of the world who have a business model that's about spying on us and about violating our privacy. But there is a whole constellation of little companies and little organizations that are trying to build a better world. And I want us to actually, acknowledge that and pay attention to them. Many of them are blockchain, distributed web technologies, and there's some cool ones that are in development. I don't think there are very many that are ready for prime time yet, but they're coming along. But then there's search engines like DuckDuckGo that doesn't search, that does ads based on not based on targeting, but based on context. So if I type in shoes, I get an ad for shoes, but that doesn't go into my permanent record, and later shoes show up over and over. So the contextual ads are ads that are based on what you're doing right there. Targeting ads are the ones that are building profiles on you. I don't have a problem with contextual ads. I think and there are plenty of people who do that kind of a business model who are coming along, but they're just tiny compared to the big behemoths. And that's why I talk about the ability to leave and the ability to develop competition as a piece of building our privacy protected future. Yeah.
Okay, if you click on the Q&A, there's a question from Graham.
Okay.
You want to read it? I don't think I would mind.
I don't think I would mind sharing my personal data if, one, I knew who it was being used by and why, and could decide if they could use it. And two, I knew if it was accurate and could edit it. Is anyone developing tools that enable people to personally broker their data? So Graham, there are a lot of tools being developed to try to help you do that. The sovereign identity, a lot of those things in that kind of space are trying to do that. But honestly, the two things that you outline here are kind of the baselines for both the European data, general data protection order, and the California things, where transparency, who notice, consent, and transparency, and then error correction are in both of these laws. I would say they're still kind of bulky to use, and they don't scale very well. You have to click. How many times do you have to click I agree, as you're going around the internet now in terms of consent to cookie privacy and things like that. So I think those concepts are good. They're strong. They're important. I do worry that that right now, at least, we haven't implemented them in a way that's really helping people to feel empowered around their data. So we still have some work to do about that.
Okay.
But you're not wrong in thinking of notice and consent and transparency as key pieces of all of this. And I think they're tremendously important. I am a little worried that again, given how many times people have to click I agree, and also the way the ad and data about you, like the market beyond what you see about this. And I'd love to kill that market, and maybe that would happen with the consent piece, but it ends up being kind of tricky. So these are all tremendously important. I'm a little concerned that they may not be enough and they may not scale.
Okay, and David has a question: which companies, if you want to read it?
Which companies are not nervous when they hear the executive director of EFF wants to arrange an urgent meeting? Well, I will tell you, a few years ago, I arranged, I got an urgent call from Apple telling me that the FBI was coming and wanted them to tap into their iPhones, and they were going to stand strong against them. So I've had urgent meetings where I said, that is wonderful. We will stand with you. We are very, very happy to do so. Of course, they've now flipped, and now we're on the other side from them because they changed their position, and we still want them to stand with users. There are plenty of companies where we're happy to stand with them when they do the right thing, and we stand against them when they do the wrong thing. I suspect most of the time, if I reach out and they want to have an urgent meeting, though, they are a little nervous because I don't, you don't need to have an urgent meeting when everything's going well. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. To be continued. This is a conversation that will go on for a long time, I'm afraid. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elisa.